First of all, is just have you give us your name, where you were born, and when you were born.
My name is Henry W. Dahlberg, and that's a Swedish name, Dahlberg, and I was born right here in Denver, and I was born on June 26, 1916, which means that in about 17 days I'm going to be 90 years old.
Wonderful.
And I feel very fortunate because I'm still so unusually healthy and limber, and I get out for a 1 mile walk about 3 times a week just to be sure that I stay limber. And of course I also put in some exercising every morning, so that try my best to keep in the best of health.
It's worked, it really is. Let's kind of go forward, and December 7th, 1941, where were you?
At that particular time, I had been married just a little over a year. I had married a Denver girl, and I had taken her out to Lebanon, Oregon, and I was working for one of the, at that time, the world's biggest plywood mill. And Pearl Harbor happened, and because of my wife having had a heart condition, we knew that we were never going to have any children. But I decided that the thing to do was to volunteer for the armed forces, and so the first thing I did, I went up to Seattle and tried to volunteer for the Coast Guard, and they checked my eyes and they said, "Well, we're sorry there, fella, but with your eyesight, we wouldn't let you even swab the decks." So then I worked a few short months longer, and then decided that I didn't want to leave my bride stuck out in Oregon, so we jumped in the little car that we had, loaded up everything that we had owned, and drove all the way back to Denver. And in Denver, I volunteered for the Air Force, and because of the fact that I had graduated from the University of Minnesota in chemical engineering, I found out that I was, in spite of my eyesight, I was eligible to become a squadron engineering officer. I had to wait about 4 or 5 months before I could report for active duty. So during that time, I went to a small Denver airport and worked in the parts department, and took out all my pay in flying lessons in little Piper Cubs. And after the proper number of lessons, one fine day I was told that I was ready to take off and fly solo. And I got in the plane and gunned it, went roaring down the runway, and all of a sudden, way ahead of schedule, this little plane just jumped up into the air, and I almost went into a panic because I had been used to going practically the length of the runway before we took off. But it only took me a moment to suddenly realize that the reason that I was suddenly in the air was because my instructor had weighed about 250 pounds, and he wasn't with me any longer, so I was in the air in no time. But I thoroughly enjoyed flying all by myself, all around Denver, up and around all the beautiful cumulus clouds and all. it was a wonderful experience, and so I was able to get my pilot's license, but only to fly those little planes, not the big ones. I was asked to go to New Haven, Connecticut, to go to the technical school for squadron engineering officers at Harvard University. And that took about 5 months of training, and was a very interesting experience. We went through the regular training of hiking all over New Haven and singing in cadence, and the most unusual experience about the whole thing was that this is such a huge institution. The dining hall actually fed 1,000 cadets every meal, and my wife was one of the girls and wives that helped with the serving of the meals. But the really amazing thing was that up on the balcony, every noon, here was, at that time, Captain Glenn Miller and his band playing all of his famous music throughout the entire luncheon meal. From there, I had my choice of whether I wanted to be an engineering officer on small fighter planes or on heavy bombers. And it didn't take me long to figure out that I would be smart to choose the heavy bombers, because I knew that the training for those was held way out west, and presumably not too far from Colorado, where all my relatives were located, and my wife. So I was assigned to the 485th Bomb Group, which was just beginning to form up in Boise, Idaho, and I was made the squadron engineering officer for the 831st Squadron. And my little wife went along with me, and we took a small bedroom apartment, and we put in about 3 months, or about 3 full months of training in Idaho. Then the entire group, once it was all put together, then we were all moved to our winter training, which was down in Fairmont, Nebraska, not too far from York, Nebraska. And so we spent a real bitter cold winter in Nebraska, learning how to maintain and fly the B-24s. And let's see, it was in the spring of 1944 that we were told we were going to be going somewhere overseas, and that we were to start out by flying first to Lincoln, Nebraska, then down to Florida, then from Florida wherever we were told to go. Well, I had been a photographer with a Leica camera ever since I was about this high, and so everywhere I went, I saw to it that my Leica camera went along, and I had it loaded with color film, which hadn't been out more than a year or two. And so starting the first day in Florida, as we headed overseas, I started taking pictures just as fast as the trip went along. We went down through Cuba, and then down to British Guiana, then down to Brazil. And from Brazil, we filled up the gas tanks absolutely jam-packed full. And in one hop, we were required to make it all the way from Brazil to Dakar, West Africa. And if you remember your geography, you better have a good navigator, because there's the shape of Africa if you don't hit it properly and you happen to drift a little too far south, then you'll see nothing but water for hundreds of more miles. And there were a few ships that made that mistake and were never found. But our whole group made it fine to Dakar. And I didn't have a chance to tell you before, but the minute that I arrived over in North Africa, I received another roll of color film from my wife back in the States, and she kept supplying me with color film during the entire time that I was in North Africa and then up in Italy. So I kept taking color slides everywhere I went, and I had no choice but to mail them back to Eastman Kodak to be processed. And so I never got to see what was going on because they wouldn't send them back to me. And but my little wife, excuse me, kept telling me which ones were showing up, and I could tell that some of them were being censored. And that I figured, well, I'll never see them again because I was taking pictures of all kinds of things that I, like the harbor at Bizerti was all shot to pieces, and there was a ship that was up on end, and the watch, I guess you'd call it the watchtower at the entrance of the harbor, looked like it had been riddled with great big shells. And I took a picture of that, and it didn't show up. And then we flew, when we were told that our base in Italy was ready, we flew from near Tunis up to our field at Venosa. And I was stationed there for the rest of the duration of the war in Europe. I was actually, I'm often asked, what was it like to go on those combat missions? And I have to tell and admit to people that I was actually strictly forbidden to go on any combat missions whatsoever. And this was also true of our squadron and our group medic, because you just can't afford to lose the key people. I was in charge of about 85 maintenance men, and I was responsible for the complete maintenance and repair on 18 of these big B-24s. And I had some wonderful guys. They could make a complete engine change in about 4 hours' time. One very unfortunate thing happened, and I'll mention that to you because this also is on my videotape. When it came time to go overseas, they had to have some maintenance just to be sure that things kept flying. So I was told that I had to fly whether I wanted to or not, and that one of my crew chiefs was going to replace one of the gunners on each of the other 17 airplanes. The rest of the maintenance men and some of our ground officers were required to go by ship. They went to Newport News, Virginia. They got on 2 different Liberty ships. They went across in a big convoy. They got past the Rock of Gibraltar, out into the Mediterranean. They had protection from British Spitfires. But one evening, just as it was getting dark, the Spitfires, I guess, were finally running low on fuel, so they headed back to base and figured everything was safe. They no sooner disappeared than a group of German torpedo bombers came in, and one of the torpedoes actually hit one of the ships that was carrying half of my maintenance men. And that ship was also loaded with all kinds of guns, and ammunition, bombs. And when that happened, the whole thing went 5,000 feet in the air in one blinding flash. And they didn't recover a soul. They were all gone in a matter of about 30 seconds. I have a picture of that in my video, courtesy of Time magazine, because they had a shot of it in the magazine. And when it came time to put my video together to try to tell the whole story, I put a few things in that were also black and white, and that was one of them. But then we were able to, first of all, when we first arrived, we lived in tents right down on the flight line. The only close call that I had down on the flight line, I was laying horizontal in my bunk, and this was about 5 o'clock in the morning, and the maintenance men, it was normal for us to usually work most of the night to be sure and get every last plane ready to fly that we possibly could. And so just as I was lying there, starting to wake up a little bit, I hear this 50 caliber machine gun go pow, 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 pow. And I sit up and I look at my tent, and here's 4 holes in my tent, exactly 8 inches right above my body. Went right through the tent. But that's as close as I came to getting a Purple Heart. Then after a while, we were able to, we were able to actually get tufa, what are known as tufa blocks. Tufa is a soft sandstone that the Italians mine right in the area where we were located, and they would mine them in nice shape of big bricks, very similar to the size of our concrete blocks that we use nowadays. And for a very nominal price, or for some cartons of cigarettes, which I didn't smoke anyway, or for the bottle of scotch that we sometimes got, we were able to get officers' cabins actually built, and we were able to put in stoves, which were rather ingenious, made of 55-gallon drums, and with some blocks inside, and all you did was put in a little valve and let 100 octane gasoline drip down onto the block, set it on fire, and the chimneys were made of spent British shell casings about this big around, just stacked one on top of the other. And so trying to keep warm in the winter was no problem at all. Took a little while to get used to sleeping on those old-fashioned army cots that you put together. And our windows were made, I traded for windows by going to the British junkyards, where they salvaged all of the spent vehicles that had been completely ruined, and we just were able to get the glass out of the Jeeps or the windshields out of some of the vehicles and install them for window glass. We had an officers' club. We also, somewhere or another, they were able to get a piano, and we had one officer who happened to arrive later on, flying man, and it turned out to be one of my very closest friends, and he was a tremendous piano player and provided music at the supper hour. There was quite a lot of gambling would go on to have something for people to do. And I've seen some evenings where one man would win or lose between $2,000 or $3,000 in one evening, mostly just rolling the dice.
We have a couple of questions here, kind of getting back into the maintenance side of things.
Yes.
In charge of this detail, you'd say, when there would be a mission, the B-24s would go out, how long would it take to get a plane ready after they came back if there was little or no damage to it? And then what kind of things did you have to do with the planes that were really badly damaged?
Well, we had some. I should explain that our runways were not dirt. Our runways were made of metal, and they had perforated holes about this big, and the runways weren't too much wider than the airplane itself. And what would happen very frequently would be the fact that while they were having their mission, their hydraulic lines would get shot out, and they would come in for a landing, and they would hit the landing strip okay, but then they would find that they didn't have any brakes at all. And we weren't equipped, our planes weren't equipped to do like the modern airliners where they could reverse the engines and slow down, so all they could do was try to use what little brakes they might still have, but many, many times they would go right on out into the nice, soft Italian mud and sink clear down to their axle on one side or the other. And we had at least one that tipped clear up on its nose, and the only injured man on that particular flight was the guy who dove out of the waist window. And I think he broke his arm when he hit the ground. But that was one of our big jobs, was to spend a good part of the night digging those big babies out of the mud, because in some cases, if they were in a crucial spot, and if they were still in the way of the planes that were supposed to take off the next morning, we had to move heaven and earth to get those babies out of there and up on the main runway that went around the entire. The planes were stationed well apart in the event of a German air raid attack, so that we had to be able to get them out of the mud up on the outer runway and then take it back to the hard stand where that particular plane was supposed to stay. There also, in this video of mine, there's one shot where one of my planes came in for a landing, and we could see that it was all shot to pieces. And come to find out, what had happened was that right over the target, the plane had taken a direct hit right in the navigator's compartment, right underneath the pilot and co-pilot. The pilot and co-pilot were knocked unconscious. The navigator was hit by the shell and blown to pieces, and his body and most of his clothing fell out of the plane right then and there. The plane went into a dive, and just by chance, the co-pilot woke up just in time to be able to pull it back into level flight again and make it back to the field. And so I've got a picture in there showing this gaping hole, the clothing hanging down where this lieutenant had lost his life, and then here are a couple boys up on one of the wings with holes right through the ailerons which had been damaged so severely that that particular plane, all we could do was haul it off to the junkyard, as we called it, and use it for parts, because there would always be a lot of parts that could be salvaged from one plane and used to repair another one that had been shot up.
That was a lot better than having to ask for parts to be sent in and wait.
The only thing we had to actually go and get, the primary thing we had to go and get were new engines. And we would have to make a trip all the way from Venosa, about 60 miles, to the port of Bari, B-A-R-I, Bari, Italy, which is on the Adriatic, which is on the east side of Italy. Naples is on the other side. And we'd have to go over there and pick up a new engine and bring it all the way back home anytime we had to make an engine change.
Were you able to handle most of your parts needs by salvaging these damaged planes, or did you get new parts constantly coming in from the States?
We got an awful lot of new parts coming in, and the supply of parts was excellent. Yeah.
One thing I was gonna ask you is, you were on this maintenance, keeping these things flying and putting them back together. Did you get to know a lot of the pilots well?
Actually, I got to know some of them a great deal better than others. We had one brand new crew that came in one morning. I never even had a chance to shake their hands or say hi to them or anything else. They climbed into their plane. They went off on a mission. They started flying north up the Adriatic. This was shortly after we first got there. And they figured that they wouldn't run into any problem at all for hours. So they just lay down in the back of the plane and started sleeping away. And out of a clear blue sky, they were hit by a couple of German fighter planes and were sent to the bottom of the Adriatic, never knowing what hit them. And we lost a brand new plane and a brand new crew. Bingo, just like that. And on my video, I think I point out at the very end that I believe we lost at least somewhere between 300 and 500 flying people. Even our group commander, Lieutenant Colonel Arnold, was shot down on one of the missions over Blechhammer, and he was immediately captured. He was put in a prisoner of war camp. He was moved from one camp to another camp several times. His weight dropped from about 160 down to about 90. And by gosh, he finally made it back to the States, but it was a long old deal. We had another, after he was gone, we had another group commander who was shot down in a mission. They put him on a train along with other prisoners of war. They were taking them from one concentration camp to another one. Some of our own boys spotted this train going by, blasted the train, and killed our own people on board the train, including our group commander. So you just never knew from one time to the other what was going to happen. I told you about our squadron medic. He was forbidden to go on a combat mission, and yet he just couldn't stand the idea of being over there and not having the excitement of going on a milk run, as they called it. So one fine day they said, well, boy, this one's really going to be a milk run. This one's over some some target were not supposed to have any anti-aircraft guns at all. So what did he do? He got shot down. He had to parachute out of the plane, and nobody knew a thing about him for weeks. His family was notified that he was missing in action. He also knew he was facing a court-martial if he did get back safe and sound. Lo and behold, about 6 to 7 weeks after he was shot down, he was, with the help of the partisans over in Yugoslavia, he made it all the way back. To the best of my knowledge, they didn't court-martial him, but I think he got quite a talking to.
Did you work on any other planes other than the B-24, or do you just focus on the B-24?
Oh, the B-24s are the only ones that we were responsible for at all. There were B-25s that would come in and pick up some of our people, and our group commanders wanted us, this was the 15th Air Force commanders, they wanted all of the men, both officers and men, to have 3 days in Rome. They knew that I'm sure that quite a few of them were Catholics and would enjoy having a chance to, especially to get to Rome. Lo and behold, and my closest, probably my closest friend was the weather officer for our group. And he asked me one day, he said, can you get on orders real fast if I were to call and suddenly say, hey, let's go to Rome? I said, I'm overdue. I think I can. Well, boy, I waited a couple of weeks. All of a sudden came the phone call.
With nothing against here, so.
All of a sudden, here came the phone call. Hey, Hank, get on orders real quick. Let's go to Rome. Okay. So here comes the B-25. We climb on board. We fly to Rome, and we land. And the three of us, the two of us, have a wonderful time visiting all the sites of Rome. And this was particularly meaningful to me because my parents, when I was only 7.5 years old, my parents had taken me, my dad had to make probably 5 or 6 trips to Europe during his scientific career. And I was the oldest of 5 children, and so in 1924, he took Mother and me on one of his trips. And on that trip, he dropped Mother and me off in Rome after the three of us had been there a little while. And lo and behold, one day we heard all of this music and ruckus out in the street. We went out on the balcony and looked down, and coming down the street, here was old Mussolini himself with his hand up in the air. And in my video, I said, little did I know when I saw that guy, that I would be coming back 20 years later trying my damnedest to kill him off. So to end the story about Rome, at the end of the 3rd day, Sid Manson, my buddy, he says, I can't understand why it isn't raining. He says, I deliberately picked out a big storm that was coming across England and Switzerland, and he says it should have hit Rome about now, because if the field out here gets muddy enough, then they can't land that B-25, and then maybe we'll get to stay an extra day. Well, lo and behold, we woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning thinking we had to get out to the airport, and it was pouring, just totally pouring. And it didn't stop for days. And lo and behold, what the outcome of it was that Sid and I managed to stay in Rome for 10 days. It was the most unusual thing. Finally, our our group commander came over in a small airplane. He rounded us up, balled us out real good, and he says, "Sid, I'm going to take you back with me because we got to have the weatherman back here at the base." But he says, "Hank, you get out there on that highway with your thumb, and I don't care how long it takes you to get home, just get home as quick as you can." So I got out on the highway. I got down to Naples real fast, and I thought, "Oh shucks, I got down here twice as fast as I should have been able to, so I'm going to take about 3-4 hours off." And I signed up for a sightseeing tour of Pompeii, which I never had seen. So I had a wonderful visit in Pompeii. I came back to the airbase, found out that there was a DC-3 that was available to fly back to a base adjacent to ours, maybe 25 miles away. And they were delighted to not only take me there, drop me off, but put me in a Jeep and drove me right back to my own base. And so I was there in no time and had a nice side tour in addition.
GI initiative.
Yep. Was the B-24 an easy plane to work on, to maintain? Did it have any peculiarities?
Yes, it did. In fact, there was one plane in particular, and this young man who is selling those books down there, his father was the tail gunner on the plane that I'm going to tell you about, and the name of the plane was Tail Heavy, and it had a picture of a babe on the front of it with an extra big hind end. And the reason she got that plane got that name was because it, for some unknown reason, it actually was so heavy in the tail that it had a tendency to actually drop down onto the ground once in a while. And we never were able, I mean, when they make some kind of a mistake in the construction of a plane, there's nothing you can do over in Italy to make a big significant correction. So we just had to learn how to fly it even though it was tail heavy.
Were there any other peculiarities of the B-24 besides one being tail heavy? Just, were they easy to work on?
I was looking over this B-17. I'm very glad that I was on B-24s because they were so much easier to get around inside the plane than these B-17s. I was horrified to see what those poor guys had to live through. We had nice wide catwalks. We had much bigger bomb bays. We could carry bigger gas tanks. We get bigger bombs, and everything was accessible. We could get at it and repair it, so that I was just kind of appalled at what these poor guys had to go through. And our ball gunner, for example, our ball gunner, they could crank him up out of the turret, in the ball turret, in no time at all. And boy, I guess trying to get him out of one of these in a B-17, a vastly different job.
Was this the first time you've really seen a B-17 inside?
Yes, I had never been inside one before. I had an opportunity, I was going to say I had an opportunity at our last reunion, which was held out in Tucson, Arizona a year ago in October. But I was told, I happened to eat something that made me deathly sick that particular morning. And I understand that although they had a B-17 on display, they let everybody walk all around it and take pictures of it, but nobody got inside out there in Arizona. But this one you could climb clear up. They wouldn't let you climb into the pilot and co-pilot, the very front end of the ship, but it was a very interesting tour.
Pretty tight quarters.
Oh boy, I should say.
I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
I think
Do you
we
have
have
anything
to.
else you want to ask specifically?
No, I was just thinking, you have had reunions.
Well, I'll just mention one thing more, and that is that after the war was over, it's also shown on my video, the minute the war ended, we packed up and drove back to Naples, and then we waited for the fastest ocean liner that was in service for taking troops back and forth. And we had to come back under blackout conditions because the war had ended just a couple days before, and they didn't know whether the German submarine commanders had been all notified that, hey, don't shoot anymore. And after I was safely home and had taken a job with a big chemical company in Chicago and had been transferred down into Florida, presumably to work until I was an old man, which didn't work out that way. Here I bought a small bungalow down in Bartow, Florida, and after waiting about 6 or 8 months after the war was over, here came a box of color slides from the Kodak people, along with a letter saying, well, here are the slides that you took that we had to censor, and we don't think that they're going to be of any service to the enemy anymore, so you may have them. So that made my video complete.
Oh, I'm glad we got that, because I thought about that earlier. when we were
Yep,
talking.
we've had guys that, we've talked to guys that they shot film or they shot photos that they had to send off to the service to have developed, never got them back. They were classified and kept secret for years and years. So you're lucky.
The other thing I didn't mention to you also is the fact that having been a photographer, as I say, and I had in the States, I had in my own home, I had built a regular photo developing shop, and I had done experimenting with making enlargements, and being a chemical engineer, I knew all of the chemicals and stuff involved. So overseas, since I had such capable technicians doing all the work, darned if they didn't come to me and say, hey, Captain, how about you being our photo shop and save us from having to go into the village with all these films that we're taking in black and white, because they could get black and white films. And so I told them what I needed, and they took a couple of oxygen bottles out of stainless steel, out of a couple of scrapped airplanes, cut it in half and gave me 2 wonderful tanks. I put my developer in one and my preservative in the other, and they would come with these rolls of film, and I would develop them and give them black and white prints. And I saw things on black and white prints that I'm sure they didn't want to send home to Mother.